Hello everyone, this is Dustin, and I am back with part 2 of my 200 NL review. In this second video, I'm going to be focusing mostly on bet sizing, and also to a smaller extent, pre-flop 3-betting, when to do it as a bluff, and when to do it for value, and why, and how big, etc. So in terms of bet sizing, I'm going to try my best to cover these 4 questions. When to bet small, medium, or big for value, when to bet each of those sizes as a bluff, most importantly why, and also it's good to understand when balance is important and when it's not important. So here's some just kind of general guidelines before we get into the actual footage. Generally for value, you should be betting big when you're trying to get value from specifically top pair or better. And you can sometimes bet big when you don't have that strong a hand, but your range looks really weak, so you think you can get called by maybe like a weak pair, just because your hand looks so bluffy. And on the other hand, you should be betting small when you want to widen villain's calling range to include more than 50% worst hands, meaning when you make a thinner value bet, you want more than half of villain's calling range to be worse than your hand. And so sometimes you're going to have to make your bet really small to accomplish that. And when you're betting as a bluff, you should bet big when you can rep a small hand and you're trying to get like a top pair weak kicker type hand to fold. And you can be betting small when you can represent thin value and are trying to get villain to fold, just like missed draws with a king high or small pairs or stuff like that. And usually the main time you should be balancing your bet sizes is in common spots versus thinking regs, and both of these things are important. You don't really need to balance sizing versus like big fish who aren't really paying much attention to your bet sizing, and you don't even really need to balance your bet sizing against regs in spots that very rarely come up. Most of the time you should just try to be thinking of the most profitable size to bet in each situation, but when really common spots come up against regulars that you're playing with a lot, then it's more important to just bet the same size so they can't get any good reads on you. And now I'll just get into the video. So here I am playing 4 tables of 1-2 no limit. I think at some point I switch out the table 2 for a 600 NL table just because maybe the table broke or something. Anyway, obviously we 3-bet ace-king suited up on table 1 for value, and then down on table 4 is a little bit more interesting of a spot. I do not think we can profitably call even in position against like this guy's middle position open. So this queen jack off becomes a really nice hand to 3-bet bluff. We do have nice blockers to queens and jacks and stuff like ace queen and ace jack, and I just don't think he's going to play back very light here. He folds a lot to 3-bets, as we see here, 76%. So I think this is a really good spot to 3-bet bluff. And similarly up on table 1, I told you I was going to be 3-betting a lot. This guy has a pretty short stack, and so he has like a little bit less than 40 big, like 35 big blinds. And so it's a pretty nice stack to 3-bet bluff when we're in position, just because it basically puts him in a really tough spot. He's usually going to have to either 4-bet, which would mean he'd be like risking a lot to win like not that much when we don't make our 3-bet very big, or fold, which is obviously great for us because he's usually going to have to fold and we're only risking 12 to win 8. Plus if we do happen to get called by one of the blinds, then we definitely have a playable hand. So I think this is a pretty good spot, and obviously the fact that he has a really wide opening range here. He's opening 62% in late position and folding 75% to 3-bet, so I think this is a really clear spot to 3-bet bluff. And he does end up shoving, I believe, so obviously we have to fold, but still think it was a good 3-bet. Down here, ace queen, we open on the cutoff, which is obviously very standard, and we get flatted from the button. Now usually this is going to be a standard c-bet because there's a lot of stuff that obviously that we can get value from, worst aces, draws, stuff like that. But I decided, just kind of through history with this player, that this player is going to be betting his entire calling range, meaning if I check to him, he's going to bet all those hands anyway, the ace-x and the draws, and he might even throw in some other just bluffs too, because this might be the kind of board that we'd be check folding on a fair amount with a hand like pocket 2s or 3s. So I expect him to bet all the hands that he would call with, plus some random stuff like king queen and maybe some weaker gut shots that he might just fold. So I decided to take kind of a non-standard line and go into check call mode down here. And up on table 2, we 4-bet ace king and got called by this guy. And I c-bet just because I'm going to be c-betting this board a lot, and he doesn't fold very often to flop c-bets, so I just go for value there. And that's that. Alright, so down on table 4, I probably could be 3-betting like close to any 2 cards here, just because this player has a really wide opening range, 50% from late position, and he folds so often to 3-bets. And so I don't want to totally overdo it, because he seems like a pretty reasonable player, and I'll probably start to catch on. But I do want to be 3-betting this Kid Ninja player very, very wide as a bluff, and probably start calling with my hands like even ace queen. I'd probably just call with there, because I'd want to play a pot against a really weak range. So as you'll see, I just 3-bet 4-2 off, I think. Partly because of everything I just talked about regarding this player, but also I noticed he min-raised from the cutoff, and I don't think that's his standard. It really looked like he was just kind of wanted to not get 3-bet or try to steal the blinds for cheaper. So because of that, and obviously his exploitable preflop stats, I decided to go ahead and 3-bet 4-2 off, which means I obviously would be doing that with any 2 cards. And fairly standard open here with 9-8 off. And it's a very dry flop, so our opponent checks. We're just going to go for a standard c-bet. And so I mentioned, in terms of bet sizing, I mentioned it's important to balance your sizing against regs in very common spots. And so obviously c-betting the flop is going to be a very common spot. So my standard sizing is usually going to be 2/3 pot. I just click the 2/3 button and bet it. And up here we 3-bet with queen 7 suited, just because he has a really wide opening range there, and people don't play very well in 3-bet pots. I don't really want to flat out of position even against a min raise, just because this guy, it's not like he's c-betting way too much or anything like that. So I decided to just go for a 3-bet. So up on table 1, we decide to flat from the cutoff with pocket 6s. Pretty standard play against the middle position open. And flop comes down 7-5-8 two-tone, obviously a very wet board, and it checks around to us, and I decide to go for a bet. The reason I bet here is basically for value. I'm not worried at all about the preflop raiser, because he would most definitely be c-betting with a stronger hand than 6s here. But he definitely could have a hand like with a decent amount of equity, like ace jack or something like that. And Stu the Kid could have connected with this board, but I really expect him to be like leading out if he has something as strong as a set. And so I just think it's important to bet here to get value from any draws, and just for protection to fold out their equity. And for the times that we do get called by like an 8 or something, we have a decent amount of equity ourselves. So we don't need to bet big here, because that just doesn't really accomplish anything. That kind of ensures that we only get called by better hands. But so when you're betting for kind of thin value / protection, all you need to do is about half pot, and in some cases even less than that, like closer to a third of the pot or something. Here with Queen 10 suited, I don't really want to flat. I obviously don't want to get squeezed by the big blind, and I don't really want to play out of position against this player who doesn't seem to have crazy post-flop stats that I can exploit very well out of position. So it becomes, kind of the top of my range that I don't want to call, so it's kind of a good range to turn into a 3-bet bluff. And clearly I'm going to open queens from the button. No action, jacks from the button. Okay, so I pick up pocket tens in the big blind on table 1, and I go for a squeeze. This is a very clear squeeze for value. I mean, it would be profitable to flat if I were just set mining, but I don't really want to play a 3-way pot out of position with tens against, two people who are probably going to play pretty well against me if I just flat. So I go for a 3-bet for value. I get called. At this point, I expect this player's range to be a lot of suited broadways, maybe like ace-jack off or ace-queen, and a lot of pocket pairs, probably like, it's tough to say, maybe 6s through 10, 6s through 9s, something like that. So let's see what happens. Okay, so he leads out. If this player has a very strong hand here, I would not expect him to bet so big, because if he wants to get stacks in by the river, I forgot to mention I'm going to be talking about bet-sizing tells as well. So not just, how big you should make your bets, but also what other people's bet-sizing says about their hand strength. So if he wanted to, get stacks in by the river, he would probably want to bet something closer to 22, more like half pot, because it obviously is going to make me more likely to call or raise. And stacks are such in this 3-bet pot with only 100 big blinds that he could easily, bet a little bit more than half pot again on the turn and then shove the river, and he'd be a lot more likely to get my stack if he has a hand like pocket sevens here. So when he bets this big, what this says to me is that he just wants to win the hand now with a hand that doesn't really want to check fold, because he just wants to win. Sometimes it's hard to explain the logic of kind of poor plays, but basically this looks to me a lot like a hand like ace-jack or something like that. And if I expected this player to continue bluffing, then I could just call here and call down. But this player only c-bets on the turn 29%, which is very low, so I really expect him to be done with his bluff here. If I call, he's just going to give up, unless, of course, he improves to, a top pair. So, for example, if he has ace-jack here, or ace-queen, he's only going to continue putting more money in if he hits an ace or a jack or a queen or whatever. So, for those reasons, I decided to raise. A lot of people might just choose to shove here, given stack sizes, because it looks like we're almost committed if we make any standard raise size. Like if we were to raise to 80 or 90 or something like that, then we'd be committed. But I choose to go for a min raise, and basically what this does is lets him spaz out if he wants to, because I already have a read that he has a hand like ace jack or ace queen. He's not going to put more money in unless he hits, so I decided to raise for protection. But instead of shoving, I just min raise to let him shove if he thinks that I'm bluffing or something like that. And so he does end up folding, but I think we definitely get more value by min raising there than we do by shoving. And given my read that he's not likely to barrel the turn, I think we just have to raise there. So I hope that all makes sense. Down here on table 3, we pick up pocket nines, and the small blind opens. He's opening a lot, so I don't hate just calling here, but I choose to 3-bet for value. He's not folding very often to 3-bets, only 47%, and I've been 3-betting a lot at this table so far, 29%. So I'm kind of just hoping that he'll either call too lightly or kind of make a bad 4-bet. but he does end up folding there. And yeah, so there were no more 1-2 games going. So I sat down at this 3-6 game with all short stacks. So that could potentially be interesting. Down here with the ace-10, I raise on the button, which is standard against anyone, and get called by this fish, Lucky Diamonds, who's in the big blind. Now, let me go back to my flop bet size. First of all, even pre-flop, I was looking at this player's post-flop stats. If you watch part 1 of this series, you'll remember I was talking about having a post-flop plan beginning pre-flop. So far this player is not folding a ton to flop c-bets, only 45%, but he's folded 100% so far to c-bets on the turn. So my plan here was basically to be double barrel, bluffing a lot. And so on the flop, when thinking about bet sizing, obviously every option is available to me. I do want to c-bet, not because I expect him to fold here, but basically because I expect him to call and then fold on a later street. So when that's kind of the plan for our hand, what we want to do on the flop is bet bigger, because he's going to put more money in. Obviously, if he calls, he's going to put more money in than if we bet smaller, obviously, and then he's going to give that extra money back to us when he most likely folds the turn. So that's why I chose to bet kind of on the bigger side on this flop. And we make top pair on the turn. So originally, if I was planning on barreling, a bunch of like overcards as a bluff, and in that case my bet size would not be that big. It might be like a little bit more than half pot, maybe $17, just because he's showing me that he's so likely to fold on the turn, so continued aggression. But when I actually make top pair and want to get called, basically his calling range on this turn I do not think is affected by my bet size very much, because he's going to have a lot of maybe flush draws, 7x, that isn't going to fold to just a 10, stuff like that. Maybe even gut shots that he called a flop with, stuff like 10-8, something like that. So when I'm actually betting for value on this turn, I decide to go pretty big, 28 into 32, which I think a lot of players are missing value by not betting that big in that spot. And basically, I guess another idea behind that is that fish just don't like to fold draws or decent pairs. And so considering it's pretty likely that he also made top pair or has a flush draw or something, or maybe a hand like 5-4, he's just not folding no matter how big I bet. So I might as well bet big when I have the vast majority of that range beat. And on this on this river, it kind of bricks off. The flush draw missed, the straight draws that didn't hit on the turn missed, and so at this point I'm basically just trying to get called by like a 7, maybe a hand like 8-7 or 9-7, and that's going to be the majority of his calling range here. Maybe he could call with a weak 10 too, but the fact that I have a 10 reduces the possibility of him having a 10. And so basically, I think if I bet really big here, it just looks way too strong. There's a couple straights out, and I could obviously still have jacks or better in my range here. So I just decide to bet, I think about half pot, just 45 into 90 here, just to really try to get called by like a 7 or maybe a weak 10, or maybe even a random 6, like a hand like 8-6 or something. And I just think he's a lot more likely to call like half pot than he is a bigger bet. And so he does call, and we won the pot. He ended up having 10-8, which I'm not sure you guys can see. Okay, so up on table 2, it looks like this table is kind of dying too, but we pick up ace-9 off on the button, and we decide to min-raise. I'm min-raising here basically because these players have such short stacks, around 30 big blinds, and so they're probably going to be 3-betting light a lot, and I just don't want to put any more money in the pot than I have to win the blinds. Plus, when they call, I want to keep as deep of a stack as I can when I have position against them. And so the fact that they're already short stacked makes it tough to do that with a bigger raise. So I decide to min raise, and we get 3-bet by this gamble player. Now we don't have a lot of hands on this player so far. Obviously only 15, but so far he looks fairly aggressive. He's a short stacker, so I expect him to be 3-betting light a lot. And so I don't really think folding is an option here. We could call and try to play in position. The problem there is that I don't really have good post-flop reads on him at all, so I'm too likely to make mistakes just because I don't really know how he plays yet. So I decided to just go for a 4-bet shove. And I actually did the math on this shove after the session, and assuming he has something like a 15% 3-betting range, which might actually be like a pretty conservative estimate in this spot, and assuming he calls with like a 6% range, which is about 40% of his 3-betting range, then this is definitely a plus EV shove. I forget exactly how much, and doing EV calcs is not the focus of this video, but I did do the math with those assumptions, and it is a profitable shove. We do end up close to flipping, which is going to happen a fair amount. The fact, too, that he only had 30 big blinds as opposed to like 40 makes a pretty big difference. I'm not making that shove against someone, especially if they have like a 40 to 50 big blind just stack. I'm a lot more likely to just fold or possibly call. But just because you're risking that extra money, it becomes not worth it. But basically, like when someone has closer to 30 to 35 big blinds, you can 4-bet shove a lot lighter, as long as you have okay reads that they're going to be 3-bet bluffing a fair amount. Here with the Queen 10, this player opens a small blind and we call him the big blind with Queen 10 off. Pretty standard. He has presumably a very wide small blind opening range. And he c-bets half pot on this flop. What that tells me is that he probably does not have a strong hand. Maybe he has 2 overs again, maybe he has a weak pair like pocket sixes. But if he had a strong hand like jacks or better, he would almost certainly be betting closer to 3/4 pot or something like that. So clearly folding is out of the question. It becomes either a call or a raise, and I think earlier in the session I had raised him on the flop and he folded just a few hands ago actually. And so here I make a small raise again, basically trying to represent a bluff, specifically because he folded the last time I raised the flop, so I think he might think that I'm trying to bluff him again. And so I just think we get more value that way. And so I raise it up to 36, which I chose this size. I think if I made it too big, it would just scare him. Like he might think maybe I'm bluffing, but he's not going to want to put that much money in. But I chose to make it kind of on the smaller side to basically make it look bluffy and make it more likely that he calls. So he does call, and the 9 of spades comes on the turn. Now, at this point, I can either bet small again, for value, which would ordinarily make more sense since the hands we're trying to get called by are, stuff like pocket sixes largely, or 9x, or maybe a draw that he just picked up. But I just decide to make it big, specifically to look bluffy. And obviously, the times that he does play back against that, we get a lot more value than if we were to make it like 55 or something. So for those reasons, I decided to bet big, a little more than 3/4 pot, and kind of hope that he would decide to maybe semi-bluff shove with a picked up draw, or just like get stubborn with 6s or 7s, or something like that. It turned out to not work, and he folds, I'm pretty sure, but that was my reasoning there. And down on table 4, we flat from the big blind, just because this player has a pretty wide cutoff opening range, and I don't really want to play a 3-bet pot out of position with king queen off. I just want to, play a pot with a strong hand against a weak hand, or a weak range at least. So we flop top pair, good kicker, very standard to just check call. And on this turn, I actually decide to lead out. I do not expect this player to be barreling a lot. Again, this is the player who only barrels the turn 29%. So I want to bet here myself to get value from draws, stuff like jack 9 or king jack, maybe a 10 that might call a bet here but won't bet themselves, or just even a worse queen. Like he could definitely have some stuff like queen 8 suited in his range here, queen 9 suited that he might just check back to pot control, which I really would not be surprised of at all given his really low turn c-bet percentage. So I lead out on this turn. I bet pretty big just to try to get maximum value. Looking back at it now, maybe I get called significantly lighter if I only make it like 16. So that could have been a mistake there. But I do think it's a lot more likely that he calls me with like a 10 if I only bet half pot here instead of 24. So I think I should actually be betting smaller here, but I do choose to go big, and he just folds, I think. Down here with ace-10 suited, I don't mind just flatting here on the button against this fishy-looking player. We only have 4 hands, but this Sweet Caroline does not have a full stack, and so far they're playing 3 out of 5 hands. So I think this is going to be the kind of player who's going to call 3-bets out of position just way too often and then check fold a lot of flops. So I go ahead and 3-bet for value here with my ace-10 suited. And we get a very dry flop. Let's take a look at my sizing on the flop. Yeah, I just bet half pot on the flop. I don't really expect him to mess around too much with complete air, so I just want to kind of take it down for cheaply. And I could have made it a little bit bigger to set up stacks a little bit closer to the pot on the turn, but this is pretty close anyway. And there are a decent amount of cards that I can just plan on shoving the turn on. He snap calls the flop, which leads me to believe that he has a not strong hand. He has a non-nutted hand, so he's either going to have, I really think he has a hand that's worse than 8x. So he's either going to have a pocket pair that's worse than an 8, or a flush draw, or maybe a hand like 9-7. And so when the king comes, the king is obviously a scare card to that entire range. I don't think he really has any kings in his flop calling range, but he does have a lot of 2s through 5s, maybe 7s even. And so when he checks to us here, I think this is a really clear overbet shove. It's not a huge overbet, but I just really want to get him to fold all the smaller pairs. Plus, for the rare times that he calls, we have an okay amount of equity with the flush draw there. And some weak players will just fold their small pairs there, but actually call with draws. And with the ace-10 flush draw, we beat the vast majority of draws that player can have on that board. So I guess it could be considered like a thin value shove and bluff at the same time. Over here, I raise, I guess, from the cutoff with queen 7, which is obviously pretty light, but again, we want to do everything we can to play pots in position against fish, and so we do get a call from this Sweet Caroline player. And we get this ace-king 8 board. I expect this player to have a super wide range, obviously, and fish tend to like to put people on hands like ace-king, or basically anything with an ace in it. And so this is a really nice spot to c-bet. I think he's going to fold out, everything worse than a king to just a half pot bet, so there's really no reason to make it bigger than that. And here with pocket 9s, okay, I raised from the button, and this player just called from the big blind. Obviously, we are doing very nicely on this flop. I expect that player to be 3-betting 10s plus for value. So he's either going to have like broadways or ace-x or a weaker pair, maybe like 4s through 8s, assuming he doesn't 3-bet those hands. So obviously we're going to bet here for value. And I think we can bet. We don't want to bet huge because we want to give him the opportunity to float. This is the kind of board that a hand like 2 broadways with a backdoor flush draw is probably going to play back on. So if he has a hand like ace-jack of hearts, He could consider a check raise or a check call, but if I just like make it big, like 30, he might just choose to fold just because it looks so strong. So that's kind of why I choose this sizing, and he does call. We're just going to bet again on the turn for the same reasons. And we get called again. So when he calls twice, I really expect him to have a lot of 4s through 8s, and maybe some flush draws that he picked up on the turn. Again, like ace jack of hearts or ace 10 of hearts, or you have a lot of like middling ace of hearts. So this river is pretty safe. Obviously, it made 4s and 5s improve, but we're still going to be ahead most of the time here. So he checks to us again, and I decide to go for an overbet shove. This might seem like kind of spewy, but it looks like we don't have a lot of hands on him because I guess I haven't played with him much at 3-6, but we definitely do have a history at other stakes. And when I make this bet size, it basically looks really polarizing. It looks a lot like I have a hand like either pocket 4s or a full house or nothing, like maybe ace king or something. Just because why would I bet this size with any other hand? And he must, like, I think he probably thinks that I'm not going to have a lot of 4s in my range here, and I can't have a ton of full houses in my range just because there aren't that many combinations compared to like total hands that I can have, like just random Broadway hands. And so I overbet shove here, kind of hoping that'll level himself into calling with any pair. And he ends up folding. He ends up tanking and folding. I think that this is probably the best play just because the extra money we make when he does call more than makes up for the times where he would have called like a half pot bet but fold to a shove. So it's definitely close. Like I could totally see an argument for just betting half pot there, but chose to take the shove line. Here with pocket 2s, I don't want to play out of position against someone with a short stack and also that I don't have great reads against, so I just go for a 3-bet and take it down. And against people with like half stacks, you really don't need to make it more than like 3 times their raise, even when you're out of position. So I squeezed with the ace-9 because this player has 100% late position opening range so far, and this player I haven't seen much of, so he's probably just a fish. So instead of trying to play 3-way out of position with ace-9 off, I choose to squeeze and try to take it down. Some nice blockers, and it turns out we do get called by this probably fishy-looking player. And stacks are kind of awkward. The pot's 91 and he has 129 behind, and so I do want to c-bet because this is a pretty dry board. Obviously there's 2 spades, but we have the ace of spades, which reduces the combinations of flush draws that he could have. So I do want to c-bet here, just to try to get him to fold random stuff that's not going to put any more money in unless they improve, stuff like king queen, or if he has a small pair that's worse than 7s, I expect him to be folding that too, just because my line's been looking so strong. But given his stack size, we really don't need to be betting more than a third of the pot. You'll notice I actually bet a little bit less than a third of the pot, just because it very easily threatens his whole stack, and so he does fold pretty quickly. What that also does is leverage the stack size pretty nicely, because when we bet 30 there, he cannot bluff raise us without going all in, basically. So we force him to commit his whole stack if he wants to play around with us, which I don't think he's very likely to do as a bluff. So we get 3-bet by this player after opening under the gun. He's going to have a pretty wide 3-betting range, I think, even though it's against my under the gun open. I've been playing pretty loose at this table so far, 38-34, and I really just think he's going to have not a super wide range, but a lot of hands in his opening range. And this is another great example on this flop of a bet sizing tell. So he bets 25 into 39. Now, This might seem kind of trivial, but I really do think that there's at least some slight significance to him betting 25 as opposed to just like 20. If he wanted to get this is a very dry flop, and usually in 3-bet pots, regulars are going to be betting around half pot when you're 100 big blinds deep, especially on dry flops, because that lets them get stacks in by the river and have enough of a stack to apply pressure later on in the hand. And so that's just kind of the standard bet size, especially for value, because it's like if he has a hand like pocket aces here, he's probably just going to bet 20 bucks, maybe 22, just to try to get, widen my calling range, try to get more worse hands to call. So when he actually bets 25, I, again, just put him on a hand that's just kind of trying to win the pot. Maybe a hand like ace-king or ace-queen, or maybe like pocket twos that he's turning into a bluff, that he turned into a bluff pre-flop. So I decided to call. Not really value in raising, and he could potentially continue to be aggressive. And so he bets half pot on the turn. The jack pairs, I don't really think he has a jack, because he probably would have bet just like a little bit smaller on the flop, plus the jack pairing makes it less likely as a jack. And so kind of going along with my read on the flop, I decide to call again. Now if he shoves this river, I'm probably just going to fold. After I call twice, it looks a lot like I have a jack, like a hand like ace jack, or maybe even a hand like pocket tens, or pocket nines that's getting stubborn, which I do, but I just don't really expect him to bluff on this river. So he does check to us. I briefly consider shoving here to try to specifically get him to fold like queens through aces, but I just really don't think he will. So I decided to check back and take a free showdown and usually expect to win. And he did show up with ace-king. Okay, down here on table 3, we open with king-queen off and get a couple callers, flop trips on the flop. Even though we have, top trips, so we kind of have the board crushed in a way, it's still kind of a wet board. There are a good amount of like gut shots and flush draws, and I don't think anyone's going anywhere with a hand like nines through jacks. And so I decided to bet on the bigger side here, just because I don't think anyone's, like, the hands that I'm trying to go for value from are mostly flush draws and nines through jacks, and I just don't think they're folding those hands to any size bet on this flop. And so we do get a call. So at this point I expect him to have a range of the hands I just mentioned, plus obviously pocket eights, but can't really worry about that. The turn comes an ace. Now, I think it's very important to bet again for value. If he has a hand like ace-x of clubs, then I don't think there's any way he's going to fold this turn. And if he does have a hand like nines through jacks, we're not going to get more value from those hands anyway, so it doesn't matter what we do. So I think it's important to be betting here again, and he does end up folding. Here with the queen 10 suited on table 3, we get an open from the short stacker player who has a really wide range. So I've already explained why I prefer flatting here to anything else. And we flop pretty nicely. We flop a flush draw and a gut shot on an ace-king 7 board. He bets about half pot. I think he's going to be betting more than this with an ace, so I can somewhat comfortably take a lot of aces out of his range. Looks more likely like he's going for kind of thin value with a king, or just a total bluff with a hand like 9-8 or something like that. So I decide to call. Maybe he'll keep bluffing if if the flush comes in or something like that. So the ace pairs, which isn't great for us, not because I think he has an ace, but because it makes it harder for us to represent an ace if we want to. But he bets 10 here, and I don't really expect him to be betting a king here very often at all. So I think when he bets here, he's more likely to either have some kind of draw or some kind of small pair that he's turning into a bluff, or just pure air. So I decided to go ahead and make a raise. I could shove here, but I think shoving just looks a little bit bluffier than just making it 30. Just to really try to rep an ace, because I can totally believably have an ace in my range here, and like most players are not going to be expecting me to raise with anything except for an ace or better. So I just expect to get a ton of credit here and get him to fold any pair he could have, and possibly even call with worse flush draws, and he does end up folding. Here with the ace-6 suited, I'm probably going to 3-bet this hand, just because I 3-bet a lot in this video. I don't like calling, again, because this player, it's not like he c-bets too much, so I can't really exploit him there. And I don't hate folding here, but I think he's going to fold a lot to 3-bets, plus it's not a terrible hand to have in a 3-bet pot. And up here with pocket sevens, we're just going to make a call from the small blind. And standard play on this flop is just a check call. He bets $6 here, which is about half pot. Again, this is even just reviewing this video now makes me realize how common of a bet sizing tell this is. When someone only bets half pot on this kind of a board, they just never have top pair or better, because they're always going to be betting more with those hands for value. So I think it's really likely that he's going to have a hand like King Queen that he's probably not going to put more money in unless he improves with, or just maybe a hand like Ace 3, just the same thing though. He's not going to put more money in unless he improves. So or maybe a 6. So I decided to put in a really small raise here, basically for really thin value. Try to get him to float me with a hand like King Queen of Spades or something like that. And obviously it's for protection too, so if he folds all those hands that I mentioned, that's totally fine. It's better than just giving him free cards for no reason. Okay, so down here on table 3 with the ace-10, this player in the cutoff opens. I think ace-10 is too strong to fold against this player's really wide cutoff opening range, so I can call or 3-bet. I don't really want to play out of position with this hand, and so that would kind of incline me to go ahead and 3-bet it, but we have this player behind us with a short stack who seems pretty likely to be squeezing pretty light if we just flat. Like if we flat here, I think he's going to be shoving like any ace, and probably a lot of like suited broadways, queen jack, king queen, stuff like that, king queen off even. So I actually decide to flat and trap with ace-10, hoping that I'll just shove light. And it obviously lets us get away from the hand if this guy has a monster, because he'll either call or raise. But he does fold, so we snap it off, and we end up flipping. And down here on table 4, we flat in position 3-way with pocket sevens, very standard preflop. On this flop, the preflop raiser does not c-bet, so obviously he does not have a strong hand. He definitely has worse than top pair. And after the preflop raiser doesn't c-bet, then I expect this player, who I'm not going to try to pronounce, to be betting if he has a strong hand. So now they both check to us. So I think this is a clear spot for a bet, just because they're going to have, just like betting for protection is a lot more important in multi-way pots, because these two hands combined have a good amount of outs against our pocket sevens. So I decided to bet $8, a third of the pot here. What this does is either gets them to just fold, and I just don't have to risk a lot, or it basically gets them to call with a really weak range that I'm just going to be able to take the pot away on the turn against. So that's why I chose this bet size. That might seem unusual, but I actually use this a fair amount. And so we do get a call from this player. I expect him to have a lot of hands like 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. Like basically anything that's worse than a queen, sorry. and maybe just random floats a lot of the time from hands like ace 2 and ace 3, just a lot of stuff like that. So I don't hate betting big on the turn as a bluff, which is kind of my standard play here actually, but I decided to check it back and kind of make a decision on the river instead. So the river comes the king of diamonds. So this player bets 26 into 40 here. If he happened to have diamonds, which is not very likely, just if you look at his flop calling range, he's not going to have that many diamonds in his range, except for specifically like ace 3 or ace 2 of diamonds. And if he did have those hands, I just expect him to be betting bigger on this river for value, because he'd want to, that's the nuts. He's going to want to get as much value as he can. Additionally, he's like never going to have jack 10. So I don't think I'm necessarily ahead here most of the time, because this definitely could be a value bet with like maybe he picked up a king, or maybe he's just making a weird bet with a 9 that he could have, like maybe he has a hand like ace 9 or something. And so even though I am ahead some of the time and I could maybe make a profitable call here, I decided to shove. He's never going to have a nutted hand here, and I don't think there's any way he's going to call here, even if he has a hand like, ace king or king 10 or something like that, king jack. And I really don't think that enough players incorporate bluff raising rivers into their game, but I think that was, a pretty decent spot to do it. So down here on table 4 again, we pick up king queen off, make a standard raise. We definitely want to play against that same fishy seeming player in position. And he 3-bets us. Now, that last hand happened not too long ago, obviously, and I don't have any reason to expect that he has like a super tight 3-betting range, but I definitely do not want to risk shoving, because then I'm only getting called by better hands and I'm just risking a ton of money, like over 50 big blinds. So I decided to flat in position. I think I'm going to be able to make a lot of money if I make a pair, just by getting him to, c-bet too much and stuff like that. So I just decided to call in position and play this weaker player 50 bigs deep in position with king queen. Obviously we flop great. We flop 2 pair. He overshoves the flop and, never folding there. He shows up with 10-6 suited, which, that's just a pretty terrible play. And the small blind min raises, and we call in position with jack 7 suited. I don't hate just 3-betting here, because we're not going to be able to play great against him post-flop, just since we don't have any hands on him. But I decided to just call. He min leads into us for $6, which, again, he's never going to have an ace here. He's either going to have a draw or like kind of a more marginal showdown hand. And so I think it's important to be raising here. Hopefully I raise, yeah. To both charge his draws, and if he does have like a 10, then I'm going to be able to get him off a 10 by the river anyway, just by continuing to be aggressive on later streets. So for those reasons, I raise it up to about a pot size bet, and he just folds. And down here, I think this is going to be the last hand. We 3-bet with pocket jacks. We don't need to make it that big because this player doesn't have a full stack, so we just make it $18. And then on this flop, we are obviously way ahead of his range. He's going to have a really wide both opening and calling range probably. He's probably a fish. He doesn't have a full stack. He's playing, 4 out of 4 hands so far. So I want to bet a size that is going to both let me get 3 streets of value and also encourage him to call with a wide range. So I only bet $18 here, which is a little bit less than half pot, so I think it's going to encourage him to call pretty wide, but also I'm going to be able to get his whole stack by the river if I want to. And he does just end up folding on the flop, but I do think the sizing is important there. And that's the video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, etc. And take care, you guys.